Ever feel like you want to, get really smart about something, but without having to wade through like mountains of information?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're going for today.
Yeah.
We're diving deep, really deep, into the world according to Jeff Bezos.
Yes, exactly.
Trying to unpack the core ideas that come from his collected writings and interviews. Kind of like getting a cheat sheet, right, to the thinking behind Amazon's journey.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We've been digging deep into this book, Invent and Wonder, the collected writings of Jeff Bezos.
Mm-hmm.
Really trying to pull out the insights from shareholder letters, from speeches, interviews he's given over the years. And it's amazing how it provides like this really rich, almost multi-layered perspective. Like you see how his thinking has evolved over time.
It's really cool to see that evolution. And I think like that's what we really want to do today is to extract those real nuggets, those key principles, the stories that illustrate them, and how this long-term vision that he had, how that really fueled his success. And hopefully our listeners will get some actionable takeaways that they can apply to their own thinking and learning.
I love it.
So, all right, let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. What kind of early experiences do you think really shaped Bezos? It seems like self-reliance and maybe like an extreme curiosity were like built in from the get-go.
Oh, for sure. Those were fundamental, like right from the start. I mean, just think about his grandfather, Lawrence Keyes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a guy who was involved in some pretty major historical moments in science, served in the Atomic Energy Commission.
Wow.
And get this, he contributed to the development of the hydrogen bomb. I mean, talk about an impactful resume, right?
Oh, yeah. It's like, you don't get much bigger than that. But then you contrast that with like his life on that farm in Texas. It was all about practicality, right? Solving problems with whatever he had. I mean, you read about him building this makeshift crane just to fix a tractor.
Right.
Pure ingenuity. And it wasn't just, the mechanical stuff. It was like everything. Animal husbandry.
Right.
Even making his own needles. Like, get this, he'd make needles out of wire with a blowtorch just to stitch up cattle wounds.
That's incredible. Talk about resourcefulness.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you can't get more resourceful than that.
Yeah.
What do you think those kind of experiences tell you about like the mindset that Bezos might have developed?
Well, I think it's fascinating because you can almost see a direct line from those early experiences, right, to the whole problem-solving ethos that you see at Amazon.
Oh, for sure.
Like, he witnessed his grandfather's ability to just figure things out, right? Not to be limited by what he didn't have. That had to have had a huge impact. I think it instilled this very deep belief in self-sufficiency and this bias toward action. Like, you have a problem, you find a way to solve it.
Totally. And it wasn't just about like, fixing things on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
There were apparently some pretty serious conversations happening about science, technology, the space race. It seems like his grandfather's curiosity was infectious.
It was, and it definitely rubbed off on Bezos. Remember, his grandfather had this whole library of science fiction books, which Bezos basically devoured during summer. I mean, he said he read hundreds of them.
Hundreds.
And the impact of those science fiction authors. I mean, think about Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein. Yeah. These are giants. It's something Bezos has talked about quite a bit, the influence they had on him. He didn't just read the stories. He really absorbed their principles, their whole way of thinking about the future and the possibilities of technology. That kind of exposure, especially at a young age, it definitely plants some seeds.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You plant those seeds of imagination and curiosity. And on his mother's side, there's another pretty powerful influence, and that's just the sheer courage that his mom, Jackie, displayed as a young mother in 1964 Albuquerque. I mean, that couldn't have been easy at all.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, try to imagine the social climate back then, right? We're talking 1964. For a high school to even consider expelling a student because she was pregnant, it just highlights the enormous courage she must have had.
Right.
And her father, Bezos's grandfather on his mother's side, actually played a key role in convincing the school to let her stay. That really shows the strength of family support during a really challenging time.
Yeah. And the biggest takeaway for Bezos from watching his mother go through all of that, he actually called it an amazing amount of guts. I mean, seeing her navigate that, especially so young, must have left a huge impression on him.
Oh, absolutely. But let's not forget his father, Miguel. He went by Mike Bezos. Right. Now, he was a Cuban immigrant who came to the U.S. through Operation Pedro Pan, that mass exodus of children from Cuba in the early 1960s. So Mike actually adopted Jeff when Jeff was 4 years old.
Wow. God, that's another story of just incredible self-reliance.
Absolutely.
Leaving Cuba at 16. I mean, that takes so much courage in this spirit of adventure.
Absolutely. So you have these powerful influences on both sides of his family. You know, the grandfather's resourcefulness, his intellectual curiosity. You have his mother's bravery, his father's adventurous spirit. It all comes together, right? It all seems to feed this sense of what they call in Chinese Exang Dinliang. It's this blend of courage and guts, and it really seems to be this recurring theme in his life and his career.
That's so interesting, and you can see it. So, all right, fast forward a little bit. After college, Bezos ends up going to New York, gets into the world of finance, actually spends some time at David E. Shaw's hedge fund. And it's there that he really hones his skills with computers using algorithms to find like these tiny little price discrepancies in the market.
Yeah. And even back in those early Wall Street days, you start to see these stories emerge about his work ethic, which was, well, intense is probably an understatement. You know, the famous sleeping bag under his desk, I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about his dedication. Like, he was willing to put in whatever it took. It almost foreshadows the kind of culture he would later build at Amazon.
Right. Always pushing, always working. But then comes this pivotal moment, 1994.
1994, yeah.
He's at the hedge fund, and he stumbles across this statistic. And the statistic was mind-blowing. It said that internet usage was growing at like 2,300% annually.
Per year.
Per year. Just wrap your head around that.
I mean, that's a lot. That's astronomical growth. It's like a giant flashing neon sign screaming opportunity.
Right.
And Bezos, with his analytical mind, he saw it instantly. He understood what that kind of exponential growth meant. And that's when this whole concept of an online retail store starts to really take shape in his mind. It was like his vision of a Sears catalog for the digital age.
And what does he decide to start with? Books. I mean, it seems kind of quaint now, but it was actually a really clever choice when you think about it.
It was. I mean, books, they're not perishable, right? They're readily available from these two large distributors. And the sheer number of titles, millions in print, compared to the limited shelf space you have in a physical bookstore, that was a huge advantage for the online world.
A massive catalog.
Exactly. It was this really smart strategic move that allowed him to basically bypass some of the logistical nightmares that a lot of early online retailers were facing. Plus, he could offer this amazing selection that no brick-and-mortar store could possibly match.
So Bezos goes to his boss, David E. Shaw, and tells him about this plan to leave and start this internet bookstore.
Right.
And Shaw's reaction is really interesting. He takes Bezos on a 2-hour walk in Central Park just to talk it through.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is that Shaw didn't just dismiss the idea as crazy, right? I mean, here's this brilliant guy, already successful, wanting to walk away from it all. But Shaw's advice really centered on the fact that Bezos already had a great career going, you know, maybe you should reconsider kind of thing. It shows that Shaw, he recognized the potential, but also the huge uncertainty of it all.
The risk. And ultimately, it seems like the real deciding factor was a conversation Bezos had with his wife, Mackenzie.
Yeah.
And her response is just incredibly supportive. It really speaks to the kind of partnership they had. She said, you know, I'd rather have tried and failed than not tried at all.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think it underscores the importance of having that kind of support system, right, when you're taking a big leap. It also speaks to Bezos' own, you know, his own bias towards action, his willingness to embrace the possibility of failure. It's part of innovation. You can't have one without the other.
Absolutely. Failure as a necessary part of the journey. Which brings us to those core principles, those key ideas that really formed the foundation of Amazon's success. And one that stands out right from the start is this relentless long-term focus.
Yes, absolutely. Right there in that first shareholder letter, 1997, it's laid out very clearly. It's all about the long term. And it's important to understand that this wasn't just some empty corporate slogan. This was a fundamental principle that guided everything they did.
It's in their DNA. They weren't chasing quick profits. They weren't trying to, you know, impress Wall Street with those immediate quarterly gains. They were focused on building something for the long haul, creating a company that would be a leader for years, decades to come. That takes real conviction, especially when you're up against those constant pressures to show results every quarter.
Oh, for sure. And what's so crucial to understand is how that long-term perspective actually aligned what was good for their customers with what was good for their shareholders. You know, things like lower prices, better service, faster delivery. These were all part of creating long-term value for their shareholders as well. Bezos believed that those weren't competing priorities, but were actually deeply connected.
It's all connected. And, this whole long-term thinking, it wasn't just about financial timelines. It was also viewed as absolutely essential for innovation. I mean, Bezos himself said that, if you're not willing to think long-term, you can't possibly accomplish things that might take a really long time to actually come to fruition. And innovation, by its very nature, it involves a lot of experimentation. It involves a lot of, failure along the way. So you need that long runway, right, that extended horizon to keep pushing the boundaries.
Absolutely. And you see that so clearly with Bezos's foray into space travel with Blue Origin. These aren't, quick return projects. These are endeavors that span generations. Even his advice to the Blue Origin team, be a tortoise, not a hare. That emphasizes that patient, persistent approach. Don't rush it. Focus on the long game.
Step by step, little by little. And Blue Origin's motto, gradatum ferocitor, it means step by step, ferociously. I mean, it perfectly captures that combination of, methodical progress and intense drive.
It does. It's that balance. Another project that speaks to this long-term thinking, and it's really fascinating, is this 10,000-year clock that Bezos has been involved in.
A 10,000-year clock.
Yeah. It's being built in Texas, designed by Danny Hillis, and it's really a physical manifestation of thinking about time on a scale that's almost impossible for us to grasp in our day-to-day lives. It's like the century hand. It moves only once every 100 years, and the cuckoo clock, comes out every 1,000 years. It's just this incredible symbol of truly considering the very long term.
It's almost like a monument to patience. And that long-term thinking is crucial. Okay, so the second core principle, equally important, and this is, again, right there in that 97 letter, is customer obsession. It was like their absolute North Star.
Yes. Focus on the customer. It was their mantra, their guiding principle. They aimed to be nothing less than Earth's most customer-centric company. And again, it wasn't just a slogan, it was deeply embedded in their culture. The whole belief was that customers are divinely discontent, they always want more. And that's a good thing. It's what drives innovation.
It's what keeps you pushing forward. He famously said that they didn't worry about the competition. Their real fear was disappointing their customers. That's a pretty significant distinction. While a lot of businesses are kind of looking over their shoulder all the time, watching what the competition is doing, Amazon just kept its focus, laser focused on meeting and exceeding the needs of its users.
And it's so true. A really good example of this customer centricity is their decision to allow negative product reviews on Amazon.com.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. It might seem counterintuitive for a retailer to actually highlight negative feedback, but their philosophy was, we make money when we help customers make good decisions, not just when we make a sale.
Right.
They prioritized building trust and transparency.
And the constant pursuit of lower prices for customers was a huge part of that. They saw it as like a fundamental way to provide value and to build that long-term loyalty.
Yeah. And that unwavering focus on the customer, it paid off big time. I mean, they consistently achieved these incredibly high rankings in customer satisfaction surveys, even reaching that top score ever recorded on the American Customer Satisfaction Index back in 1999. That speaks volumes.
It's impressive. Okay, so the third principle that really stands out is their approach to internal communication.
Yes.
And it's a little bit unconventional. They actively avoided using PowerPoint presentations.
Yeah, it's fascinating. They really believe in the power of the narrative. It's actually something you see with other innovative leaders as well, a real value placed on clear, structured communication. Bezos' belief was that well-crafted narratives were much more effective at conveying these complex ideas and really fostering deeper understanding than, bullet points on a slide.
It's about telling a story. And instead of, your typical meeting filled with slide decks, everyone clicking through things, Amazon meetings would often begin with everyone just silently reading a 6-page narrative memo.
It's a different world.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah. No presenting, just focused reading. Everyone's absorbing this detailed written argument. What's so great about that approach is it forces the writer to think clearly and logically. You can't just, skate over those weak points in a narrative.
Right.
It's much harder to do that than in a slide presentation with vague bullet points. It demands a much higher level of rigor in the thinking process.
Yeah. And these memos, it's not like one person is going off and writing them in isolation. They're often collaborative efforts. They require strong writing skills throughout the team. Sometimes they even included draft press releases.
Wow.
To help really crystallize the vision. What's the message we want to send to customers? It's a real commitment to the power of the written word in strategic thinking.
Absolutely. And I love that they go so far as to think about that customer-facing message right from the start.
It's all part of the narrative. Okay, so the last of these core principles that we'll talk about is this focus on making high-quality decisions. Bezos believed that a primary role of senior leaders wasn't to make thousands of decisions every day, but to focus on making a small number of really high-impact decisions well. Quality over quantity.
Yeah. And he had this really interesting way of categorizing decisions. He divided them into two types. Reversible decisions, which he called type 1 decisions, and then irreversible decisions, the type 2 decisions. Of course, those irreversible ones require a much more careful and deliberate approach.
And the big ones.
Yeah, they're the big ones. And for those reversible or type 1 decisions, he really pushed for speed and decentralization, empowering those teams to make those calls quickly, to experiment, knowing that if it didn't work out, hey, you can always reverse it without causing too much damage. It's this distinction that allowed them to be both really deliberate with those big foundational choices, but also agile in their day-to-day operations.
It's like having the best of both worlds. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about this incredible evolution and expansion of Amazon. We talked about the beginnings back in '94. But just a few years later, 1997, they already have over 1.5 million customers, right? And their revenue is just shy of $150 million. That's an 838% jump.
It's incredible growth. And the core strategies that were laid out in that 1997 shareholder letter, they continued to be their guiding principles. They focused relentlessly on improving the customer experience, on maintaining those competitive low prices, and on leveraging that organic growth that comes from positive word-of-mouth marketing.
People telling their friends.
Exactly. And that's so powerful.
Yeah. They also formed these early strategic alliances with some of the big players in the internet world at the time. AOL, Yahoo, Netscape. They recognized the importance of reaching a broader audience, especially in those early days of the web.
Absolutely. And I think another really critical element of their early growth was their focus on hiring truly exceptional people. I mean, Bezos really looked for individuals he admired, people who could raise the overall effectiveness of the entire team and who brought these unique talents to the table. There's that great story about the National Spelling Bee champion working at Amazon.
It's amazing.
It really highlights their appreciation for diverse skills and for intellectual horsepower, just raw brain power.
Finding the best of the best. And then, by 1999, they start making these really bold moves. They're expanding beyond books, right? Get into things like online auctions. They launched Z-Shops, which was kind of a precursor to their massive marketplace platform. They expanded to toys, electronics. They even start their international expansion, moving into the UK and Germany. And they're making these huge investments in building out their fulfillment network, like that physical infrastructure that would power their growth for years to come.
It's a massive undertaking. And during this whole period of rapid expansion, that day one mentality, that they still talk about at Amazon today, became so important. It's the idea that no matter how big or how successful you get, you have to maintain that sense of urgency, that laser focus on the customer, and that willingness to experiment just like a startup. You have to fight complacency. It's the enemy of long-term survival and innovation.
It's about staying hungry.
Right.
Never getting too comfortable.
Exactly. And then you have the emergence of Amazon Web Services, AWS. The story of how that came about is just incredible. It basically grew out of the infrastructure that they were building to support Amazon.com itself.
Like their own internal tools became this huge thing.
Yeah, and the genius of it was realizing that this incredibly robust, scalable computing infrastructure that they developed for their own use actually had a much broader application. The thinking shifted. It became, hey, every company out there could probably benefit from this.
It's true. And they ended up with this incredible 7-year head start in the cloud computing market. In the world of tech, that's like an eternity.
It is. And their whole approach with AWS was about empowering developers, right? Providing them with APIs, these application programming interfaces that allow different software systems to talk to each other, and self-service tools. It really shifted the model from companies having to make these huge upfront capital expenditures on their own hardware to this much more flexible pay-as-you-go system.
And it's incredibly flexible, incredibly powerful. And the pace of innovation within AWS has been just relentless, from these foundational services like S3 for storage, EC2 for computing power, to this vast array of other services. They've constantly added new capabilities based on customer feedback and their own vision of of where things are heading.
And what's remarkable is how AWS went from being this internal backbone of Amazon's own operations to really powering this massive ecosystem of startups. You think about companies like Pinterest, Dropbox, Airbnb, as well as these huge enterprises across, every industry you can imagine. And they weren't just listening to what customers were saying, they were also thinking ahead, anticipating those future needs and inventing on their behalf. Like creating services like DynamoDB and Aurora that customers didn't even know they needed yet, but would become absolutely essential.
It's about being ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Okay, so another real game changer in Amazon's story is Amazon Prime. Launched a full decade before the 2015 letter we talked about, it was initially this kind of all-you-can-eat model for free expedited shipping.
Yeah. And it was definitely considered a risky move at the time. I mean, think about it. They were potentially giving up a lot of revenue in those early years by offering free shipping. There was no guarantee it would work. But it was driven by the success they had seen with their free Super Saver shipping program. And there was this gut feeling that customers would see the value in having this fast, free delivery option.
And they were right. The growth in Prime membership over time has been, well, explosive is an understatement. It's become this cornerstone of their customer loyalty strategy and a key driver for their entire retail business.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to highlight the connection between Prime and their fulfillment program, Fulfillment by Amazon, or FBA.
Right, FBA.
Yeah, it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. So with FBA, third-party sellers, they can store their products in Amazon's massive fulfillment network. This not only makes the shipping process much smoother for the sellers, but it also makes their products eligible for Prime shipping, which, of course, can significantly boost their sales.
It's a win-win.
Exactly. It's a win for the sellers, and it's a win for the shoppers who get more Prime-eligible options to choose from.
It just makes everything easier. Okay, so let's talk about Alexa and Echo.
Oh, yeah, Alexa.
This marked a significant step forward in their journey of, always innovating, always pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, and it was all driven by these incredible advancements in voice recognition and machine learning. In fact, Bezos has actually said that their Alexa technology was outperforming competitors like Google and Apple in terms of accuracy in voice recognition.
It was a cutting-edge stuff. And the vision was to integrate Alexa seamlessly into Amazon's whole ecosystem.
Right.
The online store, their Prime services, those Echo devices that are in people's homes, their massive amount of customer data. They even brought Alexa into their Whole Foods Market grocery chain after they acquired it in 2017. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And when it came to acquisitions, Bezos was really particular.
Yeah.
He wasn't just looking to gobble up companies for the sake of it.
No, he had a clear framework. He looked for founders and CEOs who were truly passionate about their customers, about the mission of their company. It wasn't just about making a quick buck. He called it the missionary versus mercenary framework. And he saw John Mackey, the co-founder of Whole Foods, as a true missionary, someone who was deeply committed to the quality of his products, to the well-being of his customers. That alignment of values, I think, was a key factor in that acquisition.
It had to be a good fit, not just financially, but also culturally, mission-wise. And they also implemented some interesting internal programs at Amazon, things like their pay-to-quit offer, where they actually paid employees to leave after each year of service. And the amount increased over time up to like $5,000.
Yeah, that one always raises eyebrows. But the idea behind it was to encourage employees to really think about whether they were truly committed to being at Amazon. If someone's heart wasn't in it, it wasn't a good fit for them or for the company's culture.
Yeah, you got to want to be there. And they also had this thing called the Virtual Contact Center, which allowed a lot of their customer support staff to work from home. It provided more flexibility for the workforce and became a big part of their customer service operations.
Yeah. And throughout this period of, massive growth and expansion, one thing that remained super important was speed in decision-making. They were very conscious of avoiding those slow bureaucratic processes. They aimed to make decisions when they had about 70% of the necessary information. And they embraced this disagree and commit philosophy. Debate it out. But once the decision is made, everyone's on board.
You got to move forward. Okay, so as Amazon has grown into this massive global company, their philanthropic efforts and their broader vision, like their impact on the world, has also come into focus. And one of the most prominent examples of this is their climate pledge.
Yeah, the climate pledge. This was a really big deal. They committed to reaching net zero carbon emissions across their entire business by 2040, which is a full decade ahead of the targets set by the Paris Agreement. And they didn't just stop there. They've been actively encouraging other big companies to sign on to the pledge as well.
It's about leading by example, and they back this up with concrete actions, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. They're making substantial investments in renewable energy, things like wind and solar farms. They've placed a massive order for electric delivery vehicles from Rivian, and then they created this $2 billion climate pledge fund. This fund is designed to invest in innovative companies and technologies that are helping to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy.
Wow.
They're also supporting reforestation and conservation efforts all over the world. It's a multi-pronged approach.
And they've also taken aim at the issue of homelessness. I mean, Amazon actually went and founded the largest homeless shelter in Washington state.
Yeah.
Right at their new headquarters.
It's an incredible initiative, and their Career Choice program is another great example of their impact. This program pays up to 95% of tuition for their employees to pursue education and training in these high-demand fields, even if those fields are totally unrelated to Amazon and might actually lead those employees to opportunities elsewhere. There's this great story about Patricia Soto, who became a medical assistant through the program. It really shows the impact it can have on people's lives.
It's investing in people, investing in their future.
Yeah.
They've also made significant investments in improving the safety and ergonomics of their fulfillment centers through their Working Well program.
Yes. Safety is a top priority. And of course, during those unprecedented challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, Amazon really stepped up.
Oh, yeah.
They prioritized the delivery of those essential goods. They implemented enhanced pay and safety measures for their employees. They established the Amazon Relief Fund to help those who were hit hardest by the pandemic. And they really leveraged the power of AWS to support research and public health efforts.
It was a massive undertaking. And throughout his writings and interviews, Bezos consistently expresses a strong belief in entrepreneurial capitalism and in free markets.
Yeah.
He sees them as like the best, the most effective way to address the world's biggest challenges.
He believes in the power of those systems to drive efficiency and innovation, and ultimately to foster ethical behavior. He's actually contrasted this with, hypothetical scenarios where you have this super intelligent AI that can allocate resources with perfect efficiency, but the trade-off is you lose individual liberty. He argues that that kind of trade-off is just unacceptable.
So it's about finding that balance,
Totally.
Right? Between efficiency, innovation, and individual freedom. And all of this really circles back to that core day one philosophy. It's about resisting complacency, constantly reinventing yourself. The ideas that he outlined in that 97 shareholder letter, they weren't just a snapshot in time. They've become part of the company's DNA.
Yeah, that day one mentality is all about maintaining that startup mindset, no matter how big you get. It's about never becoming complacent, always remembering that customer focus, that sense of urgency, that willingness to experiment, all those things that define a successful startup.
Always learning, always evolving. And there's this real emphasis on the need to experiment, to take those bold bets, even when there's a chance you might fail.
Yeah.
Because both the successes and the failures, those are the things that teach you the most valuable lessons.
Absolutely. It's all part of the learning process. And it's about finding that balance between really listening to your customers, but also having the vision to think ahead, to anticipate needs they haven't even articulated yet.
Right.
Bezos talks about this balance between wandering, which is all about exploring new possibilities, and efficiency, which is about optimizing your current operations. You need both.
You need both. And he believes that the most remarkable breakthroughs, the ones that have a truly significant impact, those often come from that willingness to wander, to explore those uncharted territories, to venture beyond those well-worn paths.
It's about taking those risks, pushing the boundaries. And Bezos' long-term vision, it goes way beyond Earth, right? Think about Blue Origin. Their goal is to actually move heavy industry off our planet. He sees Earth as this precious and finite resource. He's often said, you were born in paradise. It's about recognizing the value and the fragility of our planet.
That's a powerful message. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Jeff Bezos, his thinking, his vision, I think it's worth taking a moment to really think about what are those key takeaways? What can you, the listener, actually apply to your own life?
It's a great question. And I think first and foremost, it's the power of adopting that truly long-term perspective when you're pursuing any goal that you're really passionate about. It's about making those choices today that will pay off years, decades down the line, and not getting too caught up in those short-term pressures.
Play the long game.
Play the long game. Secondly, it's that unwavering focus on your customer, whoever your customer may be. Understanding and obsessing over their needs, that's what drives innovation and ultimately creates enduring success.
Put yourself in their shoes.
Exactly. And thirdly, it's the value of clear, rigorous communication and critical thinking. And you see this in their practice of using narrative memos. It forces you to reach that deeper level of understanding and articulation when you're dealing with complex ideas. Don't shy away from those difficult conversations, from really wrestling with those tough concepts.
Yeah, force yourself to think it through. The fourth takeaway is the discipline of making high-quality decisions and embracing that experimental mindset. Knowing when to be cautious and when to take calculated risks is crucial. It's about recognizing the difference between those reversible and irreversible decisions, the ones you can't take back.
And finally, that day one mentality, it's not just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing approach to sustaining innovation and